Hello and welcome to Question Time, March 2021 here in Virtual Legality on the Hoeg Law YouTube channel. I've got an interesting setup here, as I might have mentioned in earlier videos on the channel, or maybe even in last month's Question Time. I am traveling right now, so if you could see my laptop computer screen, you would see a bunch of tiny little windows where I'm trying to manage this particular stream. So there will be maybe a little bit of smaller resolution on some of the slides and things that we're looking at in the space. But otherwise, I think we should be set up to hopefully have a pretty good conversation. Now, as always, when I do a live stream, if somebody watching could just confirm in the chat that the microphone is coming through, that people can hear me, I'm always very appreciative of that because frankly, I'm a lawyer and I'm not a technician or an engineer, and sometimes I don't hit all the switches and toggles that are necessary to make sure that everything is coming through loud and clear. Other than that, I think we have a couple of questions from the Patreon supporters that I am so appreciative of. If you don't know, Question Time has been made possible by patrons at the Patreon supporting page for Virtual Legality. Here at the senior associate level, the $10 per month level, there is a Question Time show, and those folks are allowed to present questions that I will answer on streams like this one, which will hopefully continue on a monthly basis. And through that process, hopefully we can talk about fun things. Now, the only rule in Question Time is that people can't ask me direct questions about their legal issues, as we've talked about as a part of a number of videos. One of the things that lawyers have to follow is, much like a doctor, you can't actually tell someone what is needed to be done on a medical basis or on a legal basis unless you sit down and you actually talk to them about their individual situation, that there's enough nuance and change in the law that one of the things I just can't do is say, hey, Rick, here's 6 sentences on Patreon or on Twitter or what have you, a comment to a YouTube video. Can you solve my legal problem? And not only is that a bad idea for me, it's a bad idea for you, the potential client, because it really is a question of getting deep and talking about what your issue is specifically. So that's the only rule. If you're interested in getting those questions, making sure that they are seen in a Question Time stream, Patreon is right there for you. We've also got other supporting things that if you're watching Virtual Legality regularly, you see at the end of my videos now. But with all that said, we've actually got some patron questions here. One of the interesting things about the Patreon is that I have a number of folks that are wonderful in supporting the channel at that $10 or above level that I put a post up to ask for questions, and not everybody does. So it's a very interesting process because I think that's great. I'm super happy to have that support. It's super necessary, and I'm very appreciative. But oftentimes they just want to give that support and not ask questions, which leaves us with only a few Patreon questions, but also the opportunity to have wonderful conversations with the rest of the community, which is one of the reasons I do this live and publicly. With that all being said, let's take a look at the first question from the patrons. Question time. What would it be like, and likely entail, if a newly formed small indie game dev studio reached out to you and said, this is the first time starting a company for most or all of us. We've listened to your shows and realized there is a lot we don't know about contracts, business, legal pitfalls, IP, etc. We looked at your firm's website and saw that you provide a range of services that would be helpful to us and that we realize we need. We want to work with you and your firm, but we don't really know what that likely entails. Can you walk us through the things you would do, the time and interactions involved, the costs, etc.? Now, I swear to you, although this was sent to me by email, this was not something that I put together as a commercial for the firm. And in fact, one of the things that I would say at the start of this, and I'll just skip to the end of what I talk to clients about on questions like this is, and this might surprise some of you, have you talked to other lawyers? I always recommend as part of this conversation that you talk to at least 2, probably 3 or more, because like that doctor relationship that I talked about at the top of this stream, it really is important that you have a comfort level with your lawyer, that you think they're smart and can handle your legal needs, sure, but that you are willing, as part of a conversation, to talk about the problems, the issues, the warts of your company, just like you need to with your doctor, because that's the only way that a good lawyer, any lawyer really, but a good lawyer can go and help you out. You need to be able to have that conversation. So the very last thing I always talk to clients about in opening phone calls, and one of the things that in terms of logistics I do is I say, hey, let's talk for 15 or 20 minutes. Pro bono, don't worry about the cab meter running. I need to understand what kind of client you are, what you're looking to do, whether legal value can be given to you at the front end, and whether I'm the person to do it. Because if you haven't hired a lawyer before, especially if you haven't hired a transactional lawyer, I'm not going on Law and Order, I'm not appearing in court, I'm not doing those things. If you haven't hired a person like me before, you might not realize that there are these huge areas of speciality, even within the transactional legal framework, whether it's specific labor law, local law to wherever you're operating, whether it's intellectual property law and registration, potentially environmental law if you're manufacturing something. And so you always have to have the conversation about, what are you looking to do? Am I the right person to help do it? Now, in a lot of cases, I am, because I try to make it clear in my marketing, on my website, and Virtual Legality even, that I'm a business transactions lawyer. I often perform a kind of quarterback functionality in terms of captaining a legal team. So if you need patents registered and those kinds of things, I have a referral to send to you. But I'm not doing it myself, because it's always most advantageous to have somebody that is constantly talking to Bob at the patent office rather than the person that's only occasionally doing that kind of thing. So specialization of labor is something I'm an extreme advocate for in terms of legal services, also because the people with that specialty knowledge tend to be a little bit more expensive on an hourly basis or even on a flat fee basis. And so if you have a quarterback like me or someone else, if you're talking to them on the phone, you can have them kind of coordinate, all right, the $600 an hour lawyer should only take an hour. Let's get him on the phone and off, and we'll know what to do to structure your company, that kind of thing. But starting in the first instance here, hey, you've got some people, maybe they work at a currently big developer and they want to go off on their own. Maybe they went to a specialty video game school and are looking to do something just hanging their own shingle, as we say in the law, but in terms of video games or software development or really anything else. I specialize in small business and startups, and I love the energy that those folks have. What do you need to do? Well, you need a team. And in terms of professional services, you always need two people. In my opinion, of course. This is all just opinion stuff. You need a lawyer that you trust, that can help you talk through the structure and the entities, and I'll talk about that a little bit more fulsomely in just a second. You also need, and I think people sometimes skip this part, you need an accountant. You need a financial advisor. Because there are a number of ways to structure your entities, to actually go out there, protect your intellectual property, create a video game company, a software company, a ball bearing company that you can do that will have interesting tax ramifications, especially if you're dealing with cross-border stuff, right? And a lot of game developers now are effectively acting as kind of contractor-based equity pots, where you have this entity, but the actual services are being done by maybe a couple of founders, and then you're contracting out. And to some extent, you don't care where you're contracting out to, Australia, France, Germany, South America, wherever it might be. And so you have this set of independent contractors. You need to worry about the tax flow and how money's moving around and various things. And one of the things I always tell clients is, the lawyers, a good one, can draft anything that you want. They can structure this thing with subsidiaries and holding companies and move money around and do whatever needs to be done as you direct. But you want somebody whose brain is dealing with the financial aspects, the tax implications, the accounting at that level to help guide what it is that you even want to ask the lawyer to do. So at that front end, that startup end, it's three buddies. What does it look like? Do I form in California? Do I need a Delaware C Corp? All these questions are very much driven by what you want to do and what you're creating, but also by how the money is moving, whether you think you're going to need institutional investment, whether or not you think you're going to have cash flows at the front end, revenue, or you're going to have a runway where you're going to have investment, you're going to lose money for 3 years. Heck, we've been talking in the channel about Microsoft buying Discord. I'm not sure Discord has ever made money. That doesn't mean you can't be a successful company and you can't flip it up to somebody like Microsoft or Google or whomever, because there are other aspects at play. If you've got 100 million users, that's something that you can sell. It's not just money in the door. So that model, where you're not making revenues for years and years and years, is completely different from the model that says, okay, I want to put an iOS app out there with a little luck, and maybe a little bit more than a little. I'm going to make a substantial amount of money. What do I need to do in terms of structure? Because our goal as lawyers, our job, is to make sure that we protect you as much as possible in terms of your liability. So we talk about entities to form and LLCs and things like that, but also to help guide you through what the tax implications are going to be, and we need an accountant on the team to do that. Now, I think the last thing I would say, because this is so specific to what it is that any given party wants to do, is that you almost always want an entity that's pretty much a given. A sole proprietorship is not going to protect you as much as you need to be protected, especially if you're going to be working with others. One of the things in law is you're always responsible for your own actions. And no matter how many entities I put in place between you and your actions, I'm not going to be able to protect you. The way I usually describe this to clients is if you're running a lawn mowing company and it's just you mowing people's lawns and you create a single member LLC and then you mow over somebody's foot, you are still the one to do that. And the fact that you did it under the name of an LLC isn't going to help you. But if you're creating a lawn mowing company, you've got an LLC, and that LLC is contracting out other lawn mowers, and somebody else does that, runs over your foot, well, then maybe we can structure it and get you insurance and do these kinds of things so that if somebody sues your company, you don't lose your house at the same time. Similarly, for intellectual property pursuits, one of the things we really want to make sure is that the code, the ideas, the concepts of your video game, your software, whatever it might be, are all in the one bucket, the entity, the LLC, the corporation, whatever it might be, because if anybody comes calling about infringement or anything else, or maybe in a really good day, if somebody wants to buy your entity, you want to be able to show them in your documentation that your company has every right to what it is purporting to have. That you can show them, all right, here are all the inventions assignments agreements, here's all the copyright assignments, whatever it might be, that says that this game, this piece of software, this idea is the company's. So yes, I will happily take that $10 billion because Joe over there that worked on it for 3 months, 2 years ago, isn't going to claim a right in it. And protecting you from those kinds of concepts is a part of the conversation as well. So yeah, I think in terms of fees, every kind of actual relationship is going to be different. One of the things that I really like to do, one of the reasons I kind of left Big Law, is I wanted to be able to offer more flexibility, to be able to talk to people about when flat fees make sense, when hourly makes sense, even when equity makes sense. I have a great deal of flexibility running my own shop to be able to say, okay, yeah, no, I think this is a good idea. Here's the services I can provide. And maybe we go in together in some capacity. There are a whole lot of things that make a difference as to what that looks like, depending on what you're doing, where you're at, what you're asking of me, exposure risk, and evaluation on my part. Just like any entrepreneur, and any entrepreneur like you, you're evaluating constantly who you're going to be in relationships with, what that looks like, because as a solo practitioner, as a person with a smaller law firm, it's a matter of existential crisis that you have to make sure that you don't get into very, very bad trouble when maybe there's a little bit more cushion in a large law firm with 350 lawyers like I was previously working at. So that's what it looks like to talk to me, right? Is 15 or 20 minutes explaining what you're doing, how I can help, whether I think I can help, what that rate would look like for that particular instance. But yeah, I think it's a great question. Because the right time to talk to a lawyer when you're starting a business or when you've got a really difficult contract that you're a little bit concerned about is always yesterday. The last thing I'll leave you with on this question is that it is always, always, always far more expensive to fix a problem after the fact than to spend the time considering the possible problems before the fact and get the document right, get the structure right, get the conversation right. It's just an order of magnitude. What might be a $1,000 bill at the front end is easily a $10,000 bill afterwards, just because it takes so much time and effort and really legal thinking and potentially filing with states after some significant problem has been incurred. So thank you very much. And I'm not going to use names for these patron questions unless somebody tells me to do so as they reach out, because this was received by email, and I never want to take an assumption that somebody wants their name to go out there live on YouTube, archived forever with one of these questions. So unless you tell me otherwise through the Patreon, elsewhere, I'm not going to use your name on this question, but I'm very, very appreciative, and thank you so much for asking it. The very next question, and actually our last that was set up here in the Patreon for March, and then we'll start talking to the community just in general, and you can rag on me for my thoughts on Justice League or Michigan basketball, which I am not at all worried about happening in 5 hours. And I know I've got some people in the community that are Florida State fans, and good luck to you. But may the best team win. I'm always in favor of that. But I would very much prefer it to be my team, as you can imagine. We'll see how that goes. This second question is as follows. What happened to Terraria developer Relogic to make them do a 180-degree turn without any substantive comment or explanation on working with Google and Stadia after the month-long lockout of all of Andrew Spinks' accounts? Now, if you didn't catch this video or if you didn't check it out, beforehand. We did a video that's thumbnail said doing business with Google is a liability, which was part of this Twitter thread from this game developer, which you can see here. And he said, Google, my account has now been disabled for over 3 weeks. I have no idea why. And I can't use anything in the Google infrastructure. And really the jumping off point for me in doing this video was to point out the risks associated with kind of the consolidation of your business and personal life and emails and accounts of all kinds, because it certainly appeared to be that this individual in this company had a contract and a negotiated standpoint to bring their game over to the Stadia platform that was all tied up in kind of personal accounts and things. One of the things you'd see in that Twitter thread was that he lost access to his Lord of the Rings 4K version, and it's a great version, so I can understand the concern there, but that all of this was tied together. And so I wanted to make a video to just point out that this happens across a lot of things. One of the things that I mentioned in my Xbox video was that they technically, not that they would use this because it would look terrible to them, but they technically have the right to like take you off of Office 365 if they think you said something bad on Xbox Live. And that people need to at least be aware that that's the world of contracts and the web of these kinds of terms and conditions documents right now as it stands today, because I don't know about you, to me I find that incredibly dangerous. That I don't want to lose rights to the $300 Oculus I bought because Facebook decides that it doesn't like that I said something about, I don't know, Google censorship. I never talk about those kinds of things in virtual legality, right? And so you're constantly walking on eggshells the more you tie these things together. Now, the question here is an excellent one, which is, hey, look, why did this all turn around so fast? If you didn't follow this story after I left it, and unfortunately I can't update every single story that I do in virtual legality, sometimes because there's not enough meat on the bone, there's just not enough to talk about, but also because there's just a lot happening in video games all the time now, especially when you drag in business questions like I do and big tech questions, which aren't specifically video games but are kind of adjacent. Here's an article from The Verge that talks about what happened a little bit. As you may have noted, they're quoting here a Terraria forum post. We had a ton of issues to kick off the year, stemming from the locking down of Redigit's entire Google account in early January. After a month of pushing, and with the immense support of our fans, Google finally reached out and was able to provide a lot of transparency around the situation and to restore access to all of our accounts. Now, the question asker here from the Patreon actually has a couple of scenarios that they think might have happened. They said, scenario 1, Google offered Relogic generous compensation to smooth things over, and a non-disclosure clause probably because they realized they screwed up and wanted to fix things. Remove any liability on their part, sure. Also to not spook or upset any of their other Stadia developers. Scenario 2, Google put the screws to Relogic and said, tough, the contract you signed requires you to deliver to us, and not only are the penalties for non-delivery severe, there is nothing in there that gives you any recourse if we screw up and take away your ability to deliver to us. Oh, and we'll be happy to sue the crap out of you and bleed your company dry. Oh, and a non-disclosure clause. And I cleaned up a little bit of the language there. My apologies to those of you who know who I'm quoting. I think that the interesting thing here is that the forum post doesn't give any extra details. So just reading between the lines, and it's all speculation. It's all just educational, informational conversation about what we think might have happened here. I'm not in the room, obviously, on these. When you get that kind of situation where you have it escalate up to saying doing business with you is a liability, and then the finish of that story is basically, everything's fine now. Yeah, some conversations were had about don't drag our name through the mud. And whether or not that was done with a carrot or a stick, and I do think those are the two kind of versions, the poles of this scenario, it is up to debate. Generally speaking, Google isn't using a lot of carrots. I'll say that, at least in terms of my interactions with them in the past. But even if they did in this particular instance, the question is always, when you're talking about these contracts that you enter into with these big megalithic corporations, what are the incentives? We've talked about it in virtual legality before, but you want to make sure your incentives are lined up. You had a contract to bring over Terraria to Stadia. What did that look like? What was required of you? How did it tie together with accounts? I personally think, unless there was something else out there, and I don't follow this individual, I don't follow this company's Twitter or whatever it might be, unless there was something specifically out there, it probably was in error from Google to terminate the access to an account that was otherwise a partner and signed up to a contract with them. Was that a violation of their contract? Almost certainly not. as we've looked at when we look at Google terms and conditions, when we look at terms of service for any of these companies, generally speaking, they aren't heavily negotiated because they just move on to the next party if you try to negotiate with them. And the documents are written, if not extraordinarily favorably towards them, where it's just ridiculous. I would have to tell a client, okay, are you really sure you want to sign this? At least ambiguous. So as we've talked about in virtual legality, that ambiguity can be used, especially by a company with a cadre of lawyers ready to deploy at any time, to force the issue, where you say, okay, this may not be fully within our rights, but it's probably within our rights. We looked at similar kind of conversations with respect to Parler and Amazon, right? Where I said in a video, okay, the judge is going to say this is fine for Amazon. And people came out at me and said, well, they're clearly reading it wrong or it's ambiguous and all this kind of thing. And I said, yeah, I understand that it's not a terms of service that I would recommend my client to sign. I understand that. It doesn't mean that the Amazons of the world or the Googles of the world don't know what they're doing when they're drafting that document and they don't take that ability on themselves. So what do I think happened here? I think you actually had a legitimate technical issue / overzealous person at Google who was trying to rectify things after that Twitter thread went viral. And you say, well, then didn't the Twitter thread accomplish what it was intended to do? And I would say yes. There are points in time where the contracts don't give you the rights that you think you need. If you're on the side of Terraria developer or anybody else in kind of a smaller position that wasn't able to leverage their assets and their position as much as they would have liked in the contract negotiation process. One of the things that you get to after that point in time is, okay, what other tools do I have in my tool belt? I can't use the contract. They're probably not in breach of their contract. What I can do probably, and you go to a lawyer or you talk to your in-house counsel or whatever, is I can now make some noise. In the old world, this might have been going on your local Meet the Press political radio show or something else on public access TV, getting a line to your local newspapers, whatever it might be. In the modern world, especially in video games and software and technology facing things, you go and you raise the issue on Twitter. And that was a very strong thread. This wasn't just, here's what happened and I'm upset about it, Google help me. It wasn't just those Twitter threads you occasionally see where you tag the team YouTube and say, what are you all doing? Like maybe I did when they put a strike on my channel or a warning pre-strike thing on my channel where I said, hey, what is this all about? I didn't threaten Google or anything like that, but I certainly made myself known. In this particular case, it went much, much farther. Given the status of the company as a Google partner that was going to bring something specifically to Stadia, immediately after Google essentially threw Stadia in the trash, at least in terms of their own publishing capability, and then saying doing business with this company is a liability, I mean, that's as strong as it gets. And certainly there were some strongly worded calls or emails or whatever that said, you better know what you're doing from the Google side of things. But even after that, the goal was to get their attention, and get their attention they did, because I really don't think there was much to advantage Google in pursuing this course further, depending on what was done. And because there was no conversation about how this happened, how this account got stripped, it went back with no apology on either side, nobody saying anything. It does strike me as one of those things where both sides effectively just want it to go away. And Google comes out with a perfectly fine face. Relogic says, hey, I had to blow the horn. I blew the horn and I got things where they needed to be. And hey, I want to sell copies of my game in more places. And yeah, if I've got a contract, I don't want to be in breach because Google could make my life miserable. So I think it's a great question. I think it is one of those instances where you just see a kind of perfect storm of, hey, I used the tools that I had to deploy. It was a Twitter outrage mob. I used it and I got my account back. And now we're all not going to talk about it again. I wouldn't expect to hear about it again ever. But it does still raise the question that I raised in this earlier video that everybody should be paying attention to, everybody should be cognizant of, which is how much your personal life is connected through various accounts, absolutely, but also how much that crosses over into your professional life and the very real damage that could be done when, you think you're slamming somebody, you're trolling a Justice League fan, say, and you say something and somebody thinks it crossed a line, suddenly you get modded and maybe that just flows back into your Office 365, whatever it might be, and the dangers that we have in the 21st century. A lot of the time, I do a virtual legality episode because I want to highlight what I think is a kind of hidden minefield or pothole in the way contracts and these companies work together. Not necessarily because you have to agree with me and you could think it's fine. And one of the things I tell clients is, hey, this contract has these red flags. These are the ways that you could go down with the ship. Is the reward worth it? Because there's plenty of times where you say, okay, I can't negotiate this contract with Stadia because I don't have the leverage, or I can't negotiate this contract with a bank because I don't have the leverage, or whatever it might be, where you say, lawyer, talk to me about what this contract does, where the exposure lies, and then the business person can say, okay, I think that this contract is worth enough to take this 2% chance risk that something like this happens. We've talked about it in virtual legality, but my job is to parade the horribles in front of you, to go through that contract and say, all right, how could they screw you with this provision? How could they screw you with this provision? What could this do that people wouldn't ordinarily think it could do? To make a memo, to get on a phone call, to have a conference with you that says, here's what I see. And then you say, yeah, but I think this could be worth $10 million. I might be able to flip the company on this, and I think it's unlikely that that'll happen. I'm willing to take the risk. And I say, great. That's what the business person does. That's what the principal, as we say, does. My job is to give you the best possible information for evaluating that. And then if I think you're going really crazy and I just fully disagree with you, potentially have a longer conversation about whether I'm a good lawyer for you. But that's the job, is to inform clients what's happening and to let them run the business that they are running. And hopefully in that information that I give, talking to them a little bit about business strategy, making sure the incentives are aligned, as well as kind of the specific legal liability and statutory compliance issues that might otherwise be popping up. So as I said, that's actually the questions that we have from the Patreon today. Hopefully I'll be able to read this tiny box of chat items. If you do want to ask a question, please feel free to give it. I intended to last an hour here, but if people are otherwise going about their Sunday, it's fine if we make this shorter. If you do want to highlight it for me, and you are under no obligation to do this, I do have super chats on. You could use those. Obviously, every bit of support for the channel is very much appreciated, and I'm very thankful for that. All of you are already here listening to me talk about law and business on the regular. So let's see what we've got here. Hi, Hoeg, my friend in chat. Thank you. Hoeg, hope you are doing well. Yeah, I think you can hear it a little bit in my throat, and I might have to take a swig of water here once or twice. I think a number of you know I got ill earlier this month, had to take a substantial amount of time off, just hacking up a lung. Don't have anything worse than kind of a normal cold and flu, but I still have been kind of hanging on to a little bit of a cough. If I talk a lot, which, you know, since I do YouTube, is a bit of a problem sometimes, but I've gotten really good at using the pause button as a kind of cough button. As you might see if you're ever on like a radio program, you can swing around and make sure you don't hear the coughs. But that might be all for not today if I can't keep the coughs down. All right, what do you think about Sony and the anime distribution monopoly? I gotta be honest, I was surprised. I don't know if any of you have seen this. I think Sony's in the midst of purchasing Crunchyroll. I think that's right. And they actually got a review notice on the antitrust side of things. And we talked about how this all works when all of the video game sites were wrongly reporting that a securities law S4 filing on a note conversion meant something about the Microsoft Bethesda deal, which of course it didn't. But the process is you tell us about your deal, we think about it, and then if we think we need to do a deeper dive into what you're doing, we ask you for more information. And then that can make a significant delay because that can be a longer process. We can ask, for more time. And that appears to be what happened with respect to Crunchyroll on the premise, as I understand it, and I didn't dive deep into this, but as was reported, and I checked it out, that the overall market for anime distribution, I think in America specifically, might be significantly lessened if Crunchyroll were owned by Sony. That there was a consolidation of that market structure so significant that we need to take a look at it more. Now, that doesn't mean the deal will be quashed. It doesn't mean that there will need to be changes in the structure of that acquisition. What it does mean is effectively like the yellow light or yellow flag, that there is a possibility that that could occur, that Sony might be asked to divest a portion of Crunchyroll, or they might not be allowed to do the acquisition at all, that they now have to work harder to convince, and I don't know whether it was the FTC or the DOJ, both can do this kind of thing in the United States. They now have to convince that agency that this isn't going to cause that problem, that there is still enough competition in the market to not worry about the consolidation. And to be honest with you, with the way Congress is going, with some of the rumblings we're hearing out of the Department of Justice, the Biden administration in general, I think a lot of these combinations are going to be a little bit more concerning to the DOJ and the FTC, and they might be more aggressive in attacking them. I personally don't know that this is the kind of thing that should require a stoppage at the antitrust level, but I'm also not looking at the specifics for the documents themselves. So I think it's worthwhile to follow And certainly if it is the kind of thing that the Department of Justice or the FTC stops, it is going to be a significant kind of potential hurdle, at least in the next 3 years, for other combinations that relate to these technology companies. Thank you for the question. Did you get vaccinated yet? No, April. Michigan's dates and my travel here have us moved into April, but we'll be getting vaccinated in April. Thank you for asking. Any comment on Sony shutting down PS3, PSP, PS Vita digital stores? Yeah, I think it's unfortunate, right? You know, I've been playing video games for a long time. I think it was always going to happen that the digital fronts and things would be shut down. But I had hoped that by now, 2021, there would be a better mechanism for archival purposes for all these various digital bits and bobs. So I think it's a shame. And I think it is the kind of thing where the preservationists, which, as you know, if you've been on the channel for a while, is kind of an argument that I have with people fairly regularly, that they think that games as a service and digital storefronts and things like this are a fraud. And they're not fraudulent. Sony and all these various other companies have basically said on the tin what they're going to do. We can turn off servers at any time. We can turn off access at any time. We can take away your stuff at any time. And I like to highlight those for people so that they can get into the right arguments and talk about the right things and push for the changes in those contracts in the right way. But that doesn't mean I don't absolutely 100% feel the loss of those kinds of things and agree with the preservationists that this art form, this media, should be something that is preserved for a longer period of time. And it's a shame that we might have holes in that preservation and issues such as that. That being said, from a corporate law perspective, I have no doubt that Sony wrote the right things in their terms of service. It said that they could shut these things down. I have no doubt that they are within the right, as the right reads in terms of contract law as of today. It will be interesting to see how that morphs and modifies as people that love video games, as I do and as a lot of others do, continue to grow into those kind of adult positions and look at things like law and statutes and requirements there. Because I do think it's a shame. And thank you for the question. Let's see. What else do we have here? Is pineapple pizza legal? Yeah, pineapple pizza is legal. It's okay in certain contexts. I have to have ham with it. I have to go with a full Hawaiian pizza, and it really depends on the pizzeria. I think part of this argument, and this maybe we could apply this more broadly, is individual circumstances govern large-scale umbrella positions. There are terrible Hawaiian pizzas out there. There are also some pretty good ones. And depending on where you live, you might have a completely justifiable position based on which kind of pizza you get. So yeah, I think Hawaiian pizza is legal. And I bet you didn't think I could turn that into a legal precept, but there you go. That's me. April 5th coming up, presumably for vaccination. Congratulations. I know it's a bit of a tricky thing depending on your locality, and you got pharmacies, and I think we've got a big stadium that's taking people, but only if you enter through a different app and all sorts of stuff. So good job having a date. Wouldn't Discord be a monopoly for Microsoft as there's no competition besides Zoom? Well, as we've talked about, it's always about defining the marketplace. I never want to say never because these agencies have their own people working on their own stuff, and certainly technology is in the crosshairs. So that being said, you might be right just in terms of tilt. More broadly, I think it's the marketplace for communications. And I think that you could argue that Discord is functionally similar, even maybe to cell phones, if you got the right kind of viewer of these things. So I don't know that it's as easy as all that. There are certainly party chat and at Sony level, and what is Nintendo using a phone app at this point? Who knows what Nintendo's doing ever. Steam chat things. I think you could have the argument with the DOJ or the FTC that the marketplace should be people talking to each other. I use Discord when I'm not playing a video game, so it really does seem like a chat communications device. Very interesting, though. It'll be interesting to follow. If there is a Microsoft deal, as you know, my video here in Virtual Legality is effectively not so fast. Let's not count our chickens before they're hatched. But certainly, I think the Wall Street Journal after that said that they're talking exclusively to Microsoft. The one thing I would warn people about with respect to that is, yes, just like we talked about with prior subjects, that's kind of a yellow flag. We're now one step closer to Microsoft buying. Exclusive talking just means to me, however, that Discord is only willing to potentially consider selling out to somebody like Microsoft right now it is still not at all a given that they won't just try to run up an IPO. The Roblox, and I know people get upset at me for how I pronounce that, but that IPO, or more specifically, direct action, it wasn't technically an initial public offering. We can talk about that at a different time. But that going public and that number, I think, put a lot of big numbers in a lot of people's heads. And if Microsoft says, we'll give you $10 billion, and the CEO of Discord thinks they can get 25 in the open market, it's never the twain shall meet. So essentially what they've said is, we're interested in selling to Microsoft. That's what I read when I see an exclusive, but at the right price. And if we can't get those numbers close, it's not going to happen. And just remember, when you see stories like that, Microsoft was in talks, very close to buying Pinterest, was very close to buying TikTok. This is what companies do. And if you can't get the numbers right, if you can't get the equity cash split right, if you can't get whatever it is you're looking for on either the Microsoft or the Discord side, you had exclusive talks, you tried it, you give it a try, and you said no. So it is closer than it was even when I made that video. It's still not what I would consider particularly close. Now, I say that, they might be in a conference room somewhere, $2 away from agreeing on a number. But just in terms of what we can see publicly, I don't think it's something that we can necessarily sign on the dotted line just yet. You just gave me the first chuckle of the day with the pineapple pizza argument. Thank you. Awesome. Love it. Is Xbox Game Pass for console misleading? It claims all first-party games are available on the service, but Bleeding Edge is multiplayer only, and you need Xbox Live Gold to play it or Game Pass Ultimate. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to really look at the language there. I think the Game Pass promise is that the application itself does not need an additional charge. I don't know that Game Pass really implies that the multiplayer will be built in. Maybe it does, and maybe somebody can correct me on that. But it would be the kind of thing where you'd look at the terms and conditions for Game Pass and try to determine whether or not something needing live is implied within that language. So I would never really go so far as to suggest it's fraudulent. Misleading, that's a lower standard. It might be. It would certainly take looking at the language. And honestly, I don't know how long Bleeding Edge is going to be supported. I don't think that was terribly successful out the door, was it? And what's the situation with Grounded? That's a multiplayer game. Does it need live? Or will it need live when it's finalized? These are things I don't know. But it would certainly be interesting to look at in terms of the Game Pass terms of service. Is how Gina Carano got fired illegal? In Finland, that is illegal. Wow, Gina Carano, okay. A number of people asked me to talk about Gina last month, I think it was, and I've studiously avoided it primarily because I don't view it as illegal. I mean, it would depend on what her actual contract said with Disney, of course. But just on its face, in general, a corporation is allowed to fire someone for publicly facing statements, in general, always, but most specifically if they feel that it reflects negatively on their brand or their company. And you or I can agree or disagree with who Disney chooses to fire or not fire. In terms of legality, it's probably fine. And so when we talk about these conversations, people want me to kind of get involved more in what I view as the culture war type stuff because they see me doing videos on the censorship and things like that. I think that you're fully within the reasonable minds can differ kind of scope. I don't love to see kind of Twitter mobs aimed at things really in either direction, but the corporations have to try to make the best decision possible for themselves. And I certainly think you can criticize Disney for making the decision they did, and you can criticize Disney for making the decisions they don't make on a regular basis. Disney, to me, Disney's a mess. If you watch my Twitter, you see me talking about their current plans for releasing films and cinema on Premier Access on Disney Plus and not being able to figure out what to do with the MCU and all these things. I think they have actual fundamental decision-making problems throughout their organization right now. And so I think that's reflected across a lot of the things they do. And so I'm a little bit reluctant to attach specifically a targeting problem on one thing that they're doing because I think so many of their decisions, to be frank, are ludicrous. So Disney's a weird thing for me, but in terms of legality, generally speaking, Disney's fully within its rights to do that. And thank you for the question. Will you be buying Returnal and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart? A video game question. What are your Metacritic predictions for each? Yes, I will definitely be purchasing either of those, or both of those. If you don't know, my brother worked at Insomniac when they were making Ratchet & Clank Crack in Time. I have a giant Captain Quark direct from the Insomniac store in my office, and I love it to death. I've loved Ratchet & Clank for a long, long time. I'm a big fan of kind of bright, colorful, cartoony games, and Insomniac doing that with kind of shooters and things I've always really, really loved. They've had really cool, very colorful environments in terms of space and almost looking like 50s or 60s book covers. I love Ratchet & Clank, so that's a gimme. And I think we know what we'll get on the tin. I actually don't expect the Rifts and the PlayStation 5-ness of it all to fundamentally change the experience. I just want kind of a shiny Ratchet & Clank, and I'll have a good time. Returnal, I'm absolutely going to buy. If you followed my talking about anything, whether it's Justice League or any of the other kind of things that I play, I love things that I don't know what they're going to be. I love things that are complete question marks. I've liked Housemarque games for a long time. They, to me, were making some of the best arcade-style content on the PlayStation platform. I'm a little bit sad that they're not making that kind of stuff anymore, but they seem to have brought at least some of that sensibility to Returnal. I think the Metacritic score of Returnal could be 40, could be 90, and I love that. I love that possibility because some of the things that we've seen look fantastic. Some of the things we've seen, I say, oh, I don't know. Housemarque has never made like a compelling story to me before, so it's like, oh, it could be good. Wow, I'm really interested in see what they do. And like most things, I'm rooting for them with every ounce of my being. I want to see a Housemarque that makes a ton. $70 I know is a hard kind of price point for people looking at these things from afar. I'll absolutely be buying it. And maybe I'll do a post-mortem or even an impressions piece on it. We can all talk about it at some point. But that, to me, is one of the most fascinating releases maybe of the year because I think they do have the ability to make really awesome action, and I've never seen them apply it to what looks to be an attempt at a kind of AAA narrative approach to the video game at the same time. Super interested in that. So you asked for my Metacritic guesses. Ratchet & Clank will be 85. Returnal, gee whiz, I think I'll go with the 70. Because I think you'll get probably both polls represented on that. I would love it to be a 90 or a 95. I really do like Housemarque sensibilities, and I'm looking forward to playing the game. How much research do you do into legal requirements in other countries regarding how your clients' business concerns will interact with those other countries? Depends on what they're doing, right? So I'm licensed to conduct business in Michigan. I can give official legal advice on Michigan law. I can help people get formed in other states and have contacts with other states. Certainly, we're in a global economy. That's how this all works. However, if you got a cross-border thing, let's say you're in Europe somewhere, you're in France, one of the things I have to tell my clients is, we can look up stuff, and I can give you what I think this thing says, but if it's technical, if it's regulatory, if it's tax-based, we have to go and get legal counsel, or I have to recommend it to you. And you have to go and make sure that you've got somebody complying. All of these various countries have very specific things that don't match up with U.S. law, oftentimes with respect to labor and economics and intellectual property and all these various kinds of things. So I research and I figure out, certainly across my country, which is actually different jurisdictions, 50 of them, and across border transactions. I'm a little bit more familiar with working with Canada because I'm in Michigan. There's a lot of Canada, Detroit, Canada, Michigan transactions. But if we're going to do something more broadly, I'll talk to you about what I can do for you in the U.S. and then say, you're probably going to need to hire another lawyer locally if you want to use me. And, the YouTube channel has been interesting for that, right? Virtual Legality is its own thing. It also is a bit of marketing for Hoeg Law. So people have come and contacted me and said, I like you, and that's always nice to hear. I want to work with you. And, we're putting together a team across the globe. And what does that look like? And depending on what they're doing, I can help somewhat, I can help a lot, or I can't help at all. And I can say, look, I don't want to bill you for stuff that you're going to have to fix or that's not going to work out for you. Let's find you a local person. Let's find you something that fits your needs. Now, one of the problems, especially in the United States, is in various jurisdictions, you've got wildly different price points for lawyers, right? Purchasing the time of a Michigan lawyer is significantly different from somebody in Silicon Valley or someone in the research crews over in Boston and on the East Coast. So a lot of people like to use me because I do have that big law pedigree. I can talk with that. I can, not to toot my own horn, I could beat up some Silicon Valley lawyers from time to time. Sometimes I went to school with them. It's having to try to balance that. And that's kind of in the ethics code. If you go and you look at the ethics rules for a lawyer, I'm supposed to have knowledge about what I'm talking about, obviously, and I'm supposed to be able to do the research that is needed to best advise my client. Very often when you cross borders like that, the best advice is let's get somebody that knows what they're doing in that locality. Thank you for the question. Oh, and I have a super chat. M and Rand Productions for $10. Thank you for the hours of entertainment. Thank you very much for the $10, and it is my pleasure. I have found that I love talking about these things. I love, hopefully, helping educate people about where the potholes are. I think, it's funny. I keep bringing up Microsoft and Bethesda, but that particular week of information was just so wrong. And I'm like, man, I really hope Virtual Legality doesn't have to be 100,000 subscribers, doesn't have to be 1 million, doesn't have to be something like that, but just big enough to get the IGNs and the GameSpots of the world to say, oh, wait, that's not what that does. And my very strong pleasure has been that kind of the medium tier of whether it's YouTubers or website creators and really good ones, really intelligent ones, have started DMing me when they see these stories, have started contacting me and say, oh, Rick, what is this? And I say, okay, don't go with that. That's not what is happening here. And the bigger ones are a little bit slower to the party, but hopefully we can make that happen. And thank you so much. I couldn't do any of this. I was anticipating in 2018 that I would do an episode every, couple of weeks when something popped up and it just started growing and growing and growing and snowballing. And I couldn't do this. I couldn't do this much that I do without the support of folks like you, without the subscribers, without the Patreon, and with all that help. So thank you very much myself. Hello there. Do you think PlayStation will create a server to compete with Game Pass service, or do you think they will just do their own thing? Fascinating, right? So they had their feet fully in the sand on Game Pass when this all started. They're doing their thing. We're going to spend our hundreds of millions of dollars making AAA games, and we don't think it works. And I think Microsoft is deploying a whole ton of capital to make them rethink their position. Now, will they fully rethink their position? I cannot make promises for PlayStation because, like most companies, they don't always do what I think is the most intelligent thing. Microsoft and Xbox, for the most part, is being very, very intelligent right now. Now, understand, they have certain absolute infrastructural advantages, and that is billions of dollars in cash and a market that doesn't have great options to necessarily invest in for the other portions of the business right now. So they have Phil Spencer, they have the attention of the board, and they have cash that they can deploy seemingly right now at a whim. And that is very effective. So Game Pass is the end game for Microsoft. I think Sony knows it. I think the more likely scenario long term is a kind of synthesis where Microsoft ultimately becomes a Game Pass provider and Sony still exists making boxes under TVs. But it's hard to see exactly how it gets there, especially when Microsoft might just try to destroy the Sony infrastructure. So we'll see how it goes. I think Sony is evaluating it. Big companies are generally slow. You can bet that all this aggression that we're seeing from Microsoft over the last 18, 24 months was actually being thought of years and years ago. Big companies do not move quickly. They can look like they're moving quickly to the public, and that's good. They sometimes want to do that. But they think about these things. They consider them. Nobody is saying, yeah, $7 billion, sure. Let's give it a run. So all of these things take a lot of time. There is no question in my mind that Sony is reevaluating, but also remember that the context here is that Sony is selling all the PlayStation 5s they can make, and that the Q score, the brand rating, the goodwill towards PlayStation is still pretty significantly higher than Microsoft. Microsoft is trying to change that equation. I think they are succeeding. I think they will succeed. But Sony has long said that they don't want to go down that road, so it'll be very interesting to see if they change their tack. Let's see here. Not a question, but I suspect Sony will compete with Game Pass by putting first-party games on PS Now 1 year after release. Yeah, very possibly. Have you heard about the higher-ups at Apple and Epic that are planning to testify? Yep, I've been following that. Do you see anything unusual here? What's the benefit, downsides to having all these people testify? Also, do you? And then this continues. No, I don't. Now, I'm not... Again, we have to put my expertise in the right bucket, right? I could talk to you about contracts. I can talk to you about antitrust law. I am not an antitrust litigator. So I follow these things with a different kind of expertise than you do, but from afar. The depositions that have been described, as far as I could see, as reported, don't strike me as unusual. These are hugely complicated cases. Depositions are very, very, very long affairs. I can tell you that the litigators at my old firm had a conference room that was just filled with different depositions for various cases every day of the week for hours and hours on end. Now, they got great catering. It sometimes came out to us if they didn't need it all. But It was hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. You cannot try an antitrust case without enormous amounts of detail. And depositions are testimony, so they are essentially controversial. You have to be very careful about what you say. Those same CEOs, those same presidents and C-level executives are going to have mock depositions where they have people that are going to ask them questions and try to get them on tilt. You're going to have a massive process here. This is an existential kind of case for Apple. If they lose the ability to control their own software ecosystem on their hardware, that changes a whole bunch of their business model. Similarly, it's not an existential case for Apple because they could just drop the whole thing and do what they were doing with Fortnite. It is, however, worth billions of dollars to them because if they don't have to pay that 30%, they keep that 30%. So everybody is ready. Everybody is ready to fight this fight. And this is the kind of situation where you get a litigation of this type. So it doesn't strike me as unusual, but the legal process is probably more detailed and long than a lot of you think if you're not regularly seeing it. Tim Sweeney will get in trouble with the judge with his attitude. Yeah, no question. There'll be a footnote about Tim Sweeney tweets. No question at all. I found your channel through Colin Moriarty on Sacred Symbols. Love your content, man. Cheers from a fellow Michigander. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think Colin and I are going to do another Sacred Symbols Plus, probably on defamation. A lot of questions about that, a lot of the stuff happening with respect to Troy Levitt, and when there's defamation, when there's not, and talking about the legal issues of that. I think we've got that on the calendar at some point in the future. Don't hold me to it. Things can change because stories pop up so fast. I think Microsoft is trying to bully PlayStation into adding Game Pass to the PS Store. Bully is an interesting word. I think they're certainly trying to incentivize them. I think you use the phrase Bethesda games will be available wherever Game Pass is sold, specifically to say, hey, you could get in on this if you want. But I do think even that's a dangerous thing on the Microsoft side, because if you got a Sony box that plays everything on Xbox, maybe you just have the one box. So it's interesting. They're certainly trying to have that conversation in public and also probably behind the scenes with some very specific pressures put on it. Absolutely. Usually if you see something crazy like that, it's because it's happened before and they get sued for it. Doesn't mean they lost, though. Oh, I don't. That's a response to somebody. Apologies. Have you heard about YouTube's new tax policy on international creators? I don't think that's YouTube's. I think that's the US's, actually. And as far as I understand it, it's not a, excuse me. I haven't looked at this more specifically. It appeared to just be a withholding kind of concept, whereas if you're in a treaty country, which is going to be most countries with the U.S., you effectively tell that country that you've already paid taxes on that income to a U.S.-based entity, and YouTube is just trying to do a better job of dotting its I's and crossing its T's. I'm not saying anybody has to love it, but it didn't actually strike me as YouTube's problem as much as the U.S. tax law's problem. And I know, number, you hate the U.S. and the U.S. tax law, and I think you're well within your rights in certain respects, so that's fine. I didn't view this as one of those where it's like, that YouTube, like I did, the 15-video series on COPPA. This is a different thing in kind, and I think most people are not going to be affected by it as long as they live in treaty countries. Obviously, there'll be exceptions that go against that rule, but I think it's okay, and I'll look at it again and see if it's deserving of a video. But I don't think it's on YouTube this time. Lighter question, love it. Yeah, let's talk about video games or college basketball. Since we know you watched WandaVision, yep. Have you also been watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Thoughts so far? Yeah. So one of the things I will say is, if you want my opinions as I have them on these kinds of things, you can follow my Twitter at Hoeg Law. I did do a tweet on Falcon and the Winter Soldier episode 1 last Friday. I was driving this Friday, so I haven't actually seen episode 2 yet. I will say it was very slow for me. The first episode was that action scene. I think that action scene at the front was put there because they knew how slow they had made this first episode. And I have no doubt that it will be a mid-range MCU movie type experience when the whole thing is done. I do think it presents a certain problem with what this approach might be that WandaVision avoided because it was so unusual and did the sitcoms and everything else. And that is, if you make an MCU movie and you effectively take a 4.5 or 5 hour script and you just cut it into chunks and make that movie and put it on Disney Plus, you wind up getting all of this kind of Act 1 exposition in the first episode, maybe the first 2 episodes before the actual story kicks in a way that I don't find to be terribly compelling. And I love Falcon and Winter Soldier as a character, and I love Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Stan, and I have no doubt that they will act the crap out of it. in terms of the actual content of the episode, I found it to be snoozeworthy. I might have fallen asleep, in all honesty. I think it'll be interesting to see, certainly at the end of that first episode, and if you've seen the second episode, which I haven't, you probably know this more than I, it appears to be that they might be going in a somewhat political direction about the U.S. government and possibly race. And I always am lightly stepping around that issue just because I don't have a great deal of trust for the Disneys of the world to treat it with the seriousness that it deserves. And the MCU especially seems like a poor fit. But I also want to give writers the chance to prove me wrong. So I was bored in the first episode. I'm hopeful for the long-run series, and I'm a little concerned about where Disney might choose to go with it. That's basically how I feel about Falcon and the Winter Soldier right now. Let me know if you feel differently. Phil Spencer talked about Game Pass on other platforms like PlayStation or Nintendo a month before the Bethesda acquisition. Yeah, I mean, I think they've always slightly played around with it, whether or not it'll move to other platforms, whether or not they're just really talking about PC. They use that kind of ambiguity to not say anything necessarily during press answers. One of the things I have said in the comments to my videos is that Phil Spencer is a pretty impressive answerer of questions. We do a lot of talking in Virtual Legality about poor messaging, about people that aren't answering the question or are talking to somebody else, a different audience than they pretended to be talking to. Phil Spencer is pretty good at giving you an answer that you think might be answering the question you asked, but really didn't, and is actually talking about something slightly differently. I've been very impressed with him on a fairly regular basis on those kind of live performances during the Bethesda meetup. And I think he's holding his cards a little bit close to the vest, but certainly he has put Microsoft in a far stronger position than they were in. And I tend to think that those billions are pretty well spent so far. We'll see how it goes, obviously. Certainly acquisitions are not always successful, as anybody who does, the memes of EA killing companies knows. But I think they've been pretty smartly handled so far, and it will be certainly interesting to see where it goes in the future. All right, 5-minute warning. And then we'll be finishing up with question time here in March 2021, and then you'll see me back here in April doing other questions that you can get ready, or that you can, of course, reserve a spot for over on the Patreon if you are so interested. Always love the support. Finishing up here, yes, second episode picks up, second episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Maybe not quite up to what you would want, but it's more interesting than the first one. Yeah, okay, well, that's good. It did strike me that with that as the first episode, they might have wanted to have doubled up as they did with WandaVision, because it was like, wow, that was a whole lot of nothing. And, if you could also follow me on Twitter for a thread I think I gave about how ludicrous it is for one of the most famous people in the world to have a problem with a bank loan, that in today's day and age, you'd go and you'd have a Substack or a Patreon or heck, something a little bit more lascivious. But if you're that famous that people are asking you for your photos, you open a Venmo account and Bob's your uncle. Obviously, that's not what they wanted to tell. They didn't want to tell Falcon and the Winter Influencer, but it's still something that you have to address. And maybe you have people not recognizing Falcon outside the suit. I don't know what you do. You want to tell a story about potential kind of latent racism in banking and things like that. More than welcome to, but maybe one of the people that saved the universe from destruction and everybody appears to know is a bad kind of mechanism for that. Well, we'll see how it goes. Thank you very much for telling me. All right. Oh, we have another super chat for €5. What was your biggest gaming disappointment? Oh my gosh. Biggest gaming disappointment ever? I tend to think that disappointment and enthusiasm are functions of your expectations and your hype. So the biggest one that I can think of most recently is Kingdom Hearts 3. I was looking forward to that one. I know a lot of people like it, so I apologize in advance. But I was looking forward to it, and I just pretty much hated it. It was too easy. It was just rehashes of Disney movies. Kingdom Hearts does this a little bit. The games in that series that don't do this, I tend to prefer, but so many of them are just poor rehashes of the existing movie. There's no reason why I should have to watch Let It Go again in video game form. It doesn't do anything. So that's my most recent big disappointment. I'm sure there's some cancellations there or some things. Delays are always rough if you're really looking forward to something. But mostly, I try to keep a fairly even keel. I do get excited about things because I think there's a usefulness in the joy that provides. I know a lot of people say, don't get excited about things before they're out. I'm personally right now very excited about Outriders. Very much looking forward to that game. Really love that demo. But to me, part of the fun of being a fan of something, of whether that's video games or movies or music or television or books, something else, art, horses, whatever it might be, is being able to be excited about them. Being able to say, oh, Endgame comes out in 2 weeks. I don't even know how they're going to fix all this. This is going to be great. And thankfully to me, Endgame mostly fulfilled that. Wasn't quite as good as Infinity War. But to have those 2 weeks where you're playing the Avengers theme and your wife is putting Avengers buttons on her coat before you're going out to the movies and experiencing that fun is life to me. So I try not to push too hard on that. And I try not to be too disappointed if it doesn't meet my expectations, because I still got that period of time where I was excited about something. And I think that's worthwhile in and of itself. Thank you very much for the question. Okay, and wrapping it up, we'll ask one more. Asked about startup dealing with Hoeg Law scenarios, Relogic 180 on Terraria. Matt, you are covered in the first, 20 minutes of this video. Patreon questions are answered first here in question time. So please do check that out. Apologies that you didn't see that, but 100% answered those questions. And I hope you find the answers fulfilling. But I think that might be it. We'll answer one more, and then we'll call it a day. Oh, yeah, the question about what kinds of things a lawyer would do for you starting a studio. He started with that one. Fantastic. I did, in fact. So I am very, very appreciative of everybody that has stopped by, everybody that has supported the channel, everybody that has just subscribed and ring bells. And please do check that. I'm getting reports from various people that they're losing their subscriptions to the channel, probably just a Google and YouTube hiccup. But check to make sure if you were subscribed that that's continued to be highlighted. I never know what's going on there. But so thankful for everybody that stopped in today, that's talked to me on a Sunday afternoon here on the East Coast of the United States. And I'm very much looking forward to having this conversation with you all again. Thanks again. Go Blue, Wolverines forever. Florida State fans, if you're the better team, you're more than welcome to win, but I hope you're not. Thanks again to everybody that stopped in, and I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality.